born and raised in Lincoln. She graduated from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, with a degree in journalism and philosophy, and worked at as a newspaper reporter in Florida, New York, and then back again in Lincoln. After covering education for several years for the Lincoln Journal-Star, she moved over to coordinating communications for the Lincoln Public Schools and has served as Director of Communications since 2010. Thank you for being here, Mary Kay.
Sure. All right. I am so happy to be here today. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be asked by your peers. In full disclosure, if you're asked by your peers, I also find that a little daunting because I know that you probably all do what you do so well. So I think, what can I tell you that will help you in any way? So I did what I do best. I procrastinated. Rachel asked me a long time ago, and I put it off and I put it off, and I thought, you know what, I'll figure it out the week before I'm going to speak. Well, so then last week was post-election week in Lincoln Public Schools, and it was really tricky. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, and so I didn't get it done. And then I thought I'm going to do it on the weekend, and then on Sunday, we had a really bad Sunday with Lincoln Public Schools. One of our middle school students got killed in an accident, and I was working early to late Sunday, so I thought I'll do it on Monday. So Monday I put together a fabulous PowerPoint. Monday night, I put my laptop on my kitchen table, and in one of those 30-second periods of time that you want to take back, I spilled Diet Coke on the laptop, and I watched it. You watch it, and it kind of flashes and fizzes, and then you get all those lines, and you just kind of watch it die, and then you think, I didn't back up that PowerPoint. So yesterday, I put together this PowerPoint really fast, so please be easy on me. I did this really fast. But the one thing I became convinced as I was watching my laptop die was that I was going to start by talking about the fire at LPSDO because it kind of brought back some memories of watching my laptop die. And I like to talk about the fire because it's a really kind of cool story. But it also, I think, is a bit of a pivotal moment for Steve Joel had been superintendent for a year, and I had been director of communications for a year when this happened. I had spent the previous year watching, paying attention, and my plan was to spend the entire summer visioning and, doing all those really cool things that you can do if you have a lot of time when you're a communications person. I don't know who that would be. And so Memorial Day comes along. I was in Illinois all Memorial Day weekend, 2000, what would this be, 10, 11? And I had an aunt who had passed away, and I got back very late Memorial Day night. I put my suitcase in the corner of my bedroom and thought I'll unpack tomorrow, and I literally unpacked a month later. My phone rang at 2 or 3 in the morning, and it was somebody who said the superintendent is at district office. There's a fire and he wants you over there. And of course, I'm guessing you guys, when somebody says there's a fire, don't envision that your building is burning down. You just don't think about fires in this day and age. I live about 5 minutes away from district office and went outside, and it was literally a dark and stormy night. There was lightning and thunder. It was a terrible night. And I remember coming over the hill and seeing tons of fire engines and flames going up into the air, and finding the superintendent in a corner of the parking lot where more and more LPS people came to gather and pretty much watch our building burn down on that Monday night, early Tuesday morning. The next morning, very, very early, Steve Joel, is this dying? Here? Steve Joel called together about 8, 9 of us. We went over to a very small little room in our operations building, and we all looked shell-shocked. And we spent the next 2 hours, we were in a room with, there's a whiteboard all around us, and we spent the next 2 hours filling that whiteboard with all the things that we needed to do, instructionally, finding facilities, and I had all this long communication list. And after that meeting, I went out to my car, and I put my key in the ignition, and I don't know why, but I so vividly remember this moment, because I started the car and I thought, I have absolutely no idea where I'm going. I have no office, I have no website, no functional website. We lost our website, we lost all our emails. It was, believe it or not, even though that doesn't seem very long ago, it was not in the era that social media, you could communicate much on social media. I lost all that. My laptop was inside the building in a little melted piece of metal. I lost all the ways that we communicate internally and externally. And I had a little meltdown in my car that moment. It's the last time I melted down during the next 2 years. That afternoon, we called a press conference, and about an hour before the press conference, our communications team met with the superintendent, and we wrote the 3 messages that carried us through what we thought would be maybe the next weeks. It turned out to be carried us through the next couple of years. And the messages were, we're so grateful for the support of the community because it was pouring in right away. Second message had to do with the importance of the power of public education. And the third message is my message that was my favorite. And it was about how the people at district office were essential to the public education system in Lincoln, Nebraska, and we would make sure summer school started on time and school started in the fall. And the reason I'm proud of that is because if you think about your own organizations for a minute, who are the most difficult people to humanize, or forgive me, sell? And it's those people who work in those district offices and in those administrative offices. And I talked a lot in the next year or two about silver linings. This was our opportunity to humanize those people. And over the next year or two, we did such a great job. It was a honeymoon at Lincoln Public Schools. I mean, I would not have chosen this, but I'm proud of the aftermath and how we handled the aftermath of the fire. And what my rule was, we were going to let them tell their stories. And in the middle of all of this, since I didn't have a whole months and months to do visioning and mission statement, we very quickly wrote the mission statement for communications, and we haven't changed it. We help tell the stories of Lincoln Public Schools. And if there's a theme that I'm going to talk about today, it's that please don't forget to tell your stories. I go to conferences these days and we talk about all those shiny, cool new ways that we can communicate. And they're all wonderful, and if we're good communications people, we're using them all. But I don't want us to forget that as communications people, our job is to tell our stories because they're pretty spectacular. It doesn't matter where you work. So I thought in the next few minutes, I'm just going to tell you a few of our stories and how we handle them and some of the lessons I've learned in the last couple of years about telling your story. This is one of my favorite stories because it started so miserably and ended so beautifully. And some of you might remember, and I hope that you remember some of these stories because that's meaningful. This started on the soccer field at East High School where they were playing Omaha South. Does anybody remember this? And fans of East High started throwing green cards on the field. And I actually chose this story because I think it's rather timely right now. It got so much press. It was just an ugly, ugly story. Now, where do you go from here? And one of the things I tell my people again and again and again is that one of the best messages you can share with your audiences and your community is that you're human. And when you admit you're human, whether that means you apologize or it means you're talking about how you feel, it is so powerful and effective. Sue Casada was the principal at East High then, and she still is now, and I love Sue Casada, but she handled this magnificently. I'm just going to show you, you don't have to read all of this, but this was the statement that she issued right after. And if you notice, she is not hiding behind anything. She is saying, look at this, whether we knew it beforehand and did nothing, we are all East High students, and this is all of our reputation. She says they've been contacted by press, parents, other schools, Latino groups. All of these people and more have been hurt by our actions, and we're working to heal our relationship with Omaha South. So that's how she started out, but that's not how she finished. By the time the weekend rolled around, she had set up a breakfast with the Omaha South and the Lincoln East kids, athletes and student council, to meet with each other and talk. And it was incredibly healing. Sue and I had a bit of a disagreement because I really wanted the press to be there and she didn't. So our compromise was the kids met alone, the press could talk to them afterward. And I thought it was a very good compromise. But she didn't stop there. She set up an ongoing relationship that went on for at least a couple years where the Omaha South kids would come to Lincoln East and they'd bus them to Lincoln East and they'd visit, and then the Lincoln East kids would go to Omaha South and visit. And for me, this is an example of how you tell your story, even when something starts miserably and is a really embarrassing incident. Look at how beautifully it ended. and we got the best press out of all of Sue Quesada's actions. And I do want to say it's time for questions at the end, but I do not care at all if anybody wants to interrupt while I'm talking, so feel free to do that. So anyway, it remains one of my favorite stories ever for the way you tell your story. This was a hard one for me personally and professionally, and I'm sure you all remember, this has only been a year or so ago, where we had a middle school teacher who was charged with sexual assault. So one wonders how you handle that. You think about the East High incident, and there were silver linings, and you could do beautiful stories. My lesson here is that there are some stories that there aren't a lot of silver linings. You just have to gulp and get through them. And I'm also going to do one little plug for my superintendent, who is the best communicator with whom I've ever worked. And when we sit down and talk about things like this, he doesn't blink when I say, you need to get out front, you need to explain what happened, and you need to be honest, and you need to be transparent. And he said, let me do it. So sometimes you need to keep calm, and you need to keep it simple, and you have to tell people what happened, and it's really hard. But when you're honest with your community and people, like I said, when you're honest and open with them and you admit you're human, it's quite wonderful. We had a press conference, got a lot of press that day, and the first thing Steve Joel started with was how he doesn't cry. I've never seen him cry, but that was about the close as tears as I've ever seen, because he said this is just hard when you're an educator, that something like this would happen. And I'm appalled, and everybody I know is appalled. And then he went on to tell a very simple story, what we would do, what our steps were. But there are some stories that don't have a lot of silver linings. You just have to go through them. There's only one way to do it. I love this story. This is Gracie, and I don't know if you remember, a little girl from Everett Elementary disappeared. One day she left school. And what happens when we can't find somebody, we actually didn't know she left, we take the school inside out, and there's a point at which we call the parents, and we have to notify the police because we couldn't find Gracie anywhere. So this is late November, as I recall, cold day, cold, cloudy day. The afternoon wears on, we can't find Gracie. We're working with the police, and we started helping them publicize the fact that Gracie was missing, and we put pictures everywhere. Ordinarily, we wouldn't tell you things like she was nonverbal and she had some special ed issues, but when the police tell you, yes, you need to tell the public that, we told the public that. Coming toward nightfall, the entire Everett staff is out looking. People from district office come looking. When people hear it on the news, there are hundreds of people scouring the Everett neighborhood. Does anybody remember where Gracie was? She was opening presents. She had gone inside some house where they left the door open, and she was opening Christmas presents. And then she didn't turn, I know, it was a wonderful story. She didn't turn the oven on, but she tried to bake a cake. So then she left at some point, and we found her. Somebody found her at like 5:36, just when it was getting really, really dark. And my lesson here is that sometimes you just have good luck, because if something horrible had happened, people would have said, how did you lose a kid? And when I say, you know, we have 41,000 kids, and we knew where 40,999 of them were that day. Does that count? It doesn't count. Gracie was safe, and it was funny, and we actually ended up doing a press conference, and we got a lot of questions. How do you lose a child? And there are good answers for improving procedures and doing a better job, but it would have been a much different story if anything would have happened to Gracie. So in communications, I always say crossing your fingers is a really good strategy. A lot of times it works, sometimes. And sometimes it's not just accidental, it's very intentional. I love the day that they announce how many kids go attend Lincoln Public Schools. We count them on the final Friday in September. And before I came, nobody ever did anything or celebrated. And I think that of all the messages that are so simple, you know, it's hard to spread the message that our demographics are getting more complicated. And it's tricky to say instruction is getting more complicated. But the story that we are growing by 1,000 kids every year is a pretty easily understood lesson and message. And so this year we took a bunch of kids out in the back of, I'm trying to remember, I think this may have been West Lincoln. And we had we did a big announcement in front of the news media and had drum rolls, and the kids were throwing confetti in the back, and we unveiled the new number of kids that go to Lincoln Public Schools. So sometimes it's not luck. This was a very intentionally planned story in how you can announce your numbers, and I thought this was a lot of fun. We raised the bar. I don't know what we're going to do next year. And of course I have to talk, I can't go anywhere anymore that I don't get asked about purple penguins. Purple penguins was hard. It was a long, grueling, hard year, my hardest year ever professionally. And I don't know if you understand, I'm going to just tell you what purple penguins is, because I think to this day not everybody understands. For years, several years now, we have done professional staff training to help teachers understand how you deal with transgender students. It's gone on for quite some time. We have a really wonderful curriculum and have wonderful plans for how we do that. But this particular year, somebody had circulated a handout. And depending on what you feel, I thought it was actually a pretty innocuous handout, but the handout, it was a national handout, and it said it had a list of recommendations. If you have a transgender child in your class, here are things that you might want to consider. And one of the things it said was, if you have a transgender child in your class, you might want to consider not using girls and boys. You might want to consider using scholars or students, or you might use the mascot of the school. Now, the man that wrote this handout, the mascot at his child's school was a penguin. So he said, you might want to consider blue and purple penguins. Famous last words. So there were some folks in Lincoln who were very upset that we would be doing anything related to transgender children, and they got a hold of they handed this out at a staff meeting at one of our schools, and they got a hold of the handout, and the rest is history. Now, I don't know, has anybody in here had bad news go viral in your organization? I can't even describe it. It is amazing. Because, I mean, I kid you not, within 40 hours, Rush Limbaugh is saying that the Lincoln Public Schools will not let their teachers say girl, boy. Superintendent is at the gym, and he's sitting next to a guy who just got back from Europe and says that he read in a Czechoslovakian newspaper that the educators in Lincoln, Nebraska will not let their teachers say girls and boys. I mean, it was crazy. We got thousands of emails and phone calls at district office, and they were vicious. I mean, they told us they were going to kill us. There were links to websites where people had guns. I mean, it was a really frightening, difficult time. And I can't tell you how odd it is when you're used to, I've always been able to pretty much stay on top of the message, and it doesn't always go exactly the way I think it's going to go, but to watch it spiral out of control and not really know how you stop total lies. It was incredible. If I had to do it over again, I would we've come to some conclusions, and I think we landed eventually in a pretty good place. The one thing I might do differently is do it faster. I felt like we were playing defense for too long and we should have gotten on offense, but I learned a lot in that year. First thing I would do sooner is listen. It took me a long time to find that handout. I didn't even know what we were talking about for the longest time, and nobody else did at district office. And the people that were spreading the rumor, we couldn't even find the handout. So I would be much more intentional in trying to figure out what in the heck are they talking about, because the whole purple penguin thing totally confused me until somebody explained that that was the mascot at the guy's school, which is totally understandable now. We also, I think, did a good job listening to our community. And I don't know if you heard the board meeting that we held right after this happened, 4 hours of community comment. I've never experienced anything like it. And it was on all sides of the issue. It was people saying, you know, this is a terrible thing. It was people saying, we're behind you. And it was people saying, you're not doing enough for transgender students. So we had them all over the place, but 4 hours of testimony. If you read other school districts that have handled this across the country, most of them cut comment off, and we did not. And it is painful sitting there to listen, but I'm really proud of the fact that we didn't cut it off. And we had following board meetings for, I guess months, where we kept having people come and talk, and we never cut them off. It was really important that people feel listened to. It was really interesting because people would be sort of on different sides of the aisle, and then in the break they'd be talking to each other. And I thought I was proud of being in Lincoln, Nebraska, where that was happening. Another thing I decided, probably later than I should have, is that we very much needed to concentrate on our own community. Now, some of you who work at national or international companies don't have this luxury, but I had the luxury of saying, you know what, I don't care what they're saying in Czechoslovakia, and I don't even care what they're saying in Chicago. I care what my Lincoln community thinks. And so eventually we landed, we had all these messages that we were trying to answer, and finally I said, you know what, we're not answering anything that's not from Lancaster County. Nebraska, maybe, but we're not going any further than that. It's the first time I have ever cut off comments on a Facebook page. I hope it's the last time, because it was vicious and ugly, and there was a moment I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to allow our Facebook page to host these kinds of comments. But it helped when we decided to focus local, because mostly our community was behind us. There was a lot of wonderful conversation and debate, but mostly our community was behind us. And finally, we had to figure out what our story was in all of this. And we fumbled around a little bit with that until Steve Joel was talking to the board one night, and he mentioned all means all. And this became our rallying cry the rest of the year, all means all. We educate all kids, all means all. And it really focused our message and focused all of, I think, the educators at Lincoln Public Schools and most of the community to say, we are behind you. But I'm telling you, if anything goes viral, call me up, because it was a most interesting experience, and it's a very, very helpless feeling. Never felt like that before professionally. Lots of lessons. This happened a couple of years ago, and I couldn't find something that really symbolized this. This was about teen suicide. A couple of years ago, we had an unusual stream of teen suicides, and they were public. I don't know if you remember, a couple of kids jumped off of buildings in downtown Lincoln, and then we had some private ones, and then there were some at the parochial schools. And it was painful. Now, this kind of communications, I say, you have to be careful and thoughtful about. And this is also an excuse to show you a picture of my gorgeous granddaughter Scout. Because when you have a suicide, you can't just jump right away. You have to be really careful, because there's all kinds of possibilities. If we start talking, then we're going to get copycats. And so all the mental health professionals in the community will say, don't talk about this, stay quiet. Well, I think it was like the 7th or 8th suicide, I kid you not. We brought community members together and we talked. And sometimes it's very effective to tell your story with other partnerships. And so what we did was we did a press conference with a whole bunch of community groups, and we announced that we were forming a coalition. And we didn't get into the weeds about suicide, because we were trying to follow mental health official advice and not get too personal. But we expressed our care, and that the only way we were going to solve it was with the entire community. And I don't know if you've followed that at all, but that coalition has been successful. They had a list of what they wanted to get done. They got this sign put on top of all of the parking garages in downtown Lincoln. And they decided first it was going to be a short-term organization, but I think they've decided they're going to keep going and be a long-term organization. So I'm really proud of this story, but sometimes you have to decide, I can't tell this story alone. I need other people to help me tell it. And then there's this year, the National Anthem. They're all tricky. This one was particularly tricky and we got, again, phone calls, emails, how could you be unpatriotic? All sides of the spectrum. This was a hard one, just knowing quite how to handle this. Where we landed, interestingly enough, and part of it was I landed on the message pretty quickly, but I didn't know how to handle the message. And what we decided was we were going to share the message with our own staff, and we do this often. I know, using ambassadors, so you use your own people to be good ambassadors, and in this one we really relied on our own staff. So we decided, this is the statement we came up with, and you don't have to read it all, but it's important. The line that I found important was, we do not endorse, nor do we condemn. That's a very, very powerful statement for us, because people kept saying, well, you endorsed it, well, you condemned it. Well, we didn't do either. But, and I think this is a teachable moment for our students about the many facets of our U.S. Constitution. So we never really did an on-camera interview because I didn't really want to do that. I knew we were in a bit of a no-win situation, but we shared this with coaches, we shared this with the entire Lincoln Public Schools staff, and it caught fire and got sent to a lot of places, and that was the way we shared that story. Very tricky story, and I know everybody understands how tricky that story was. It was a lot of fun. And then the elections happened, and I think we underestimated what was going to happen in our schools following the election. It doesn't matter to me which aisle you're on, but we had teachers show up the next day saying it was the most difficult teaching day of their lives, because there was so much emotion. There was so much divisiveness in that election that it didn't matter if you were with Hillary or Trump. Kids were just so angry at one another the next day. Plus, we were dealing with an ELL population of kids who were terrified. Some of the families didn't let their kids go to school because they were afraid they were going to be deported if they went to school. And the kids who showed up, some kids would say, pack your bags, you're gone. So it was a really hard day, and I don't think we understood what was going to happen. So it took us about 24 hours to get our act together, and the superintendent, executive team, and communications team all talked, and we have phases that we're working through, and frankly that we are still working through. It started, and this is way too long, but I'm just showing you. This is a message that Steve Joel sent to all of our staff members last Friday. And it pretty much said, you know, we're all in this together. This is a tricky time, but it's time to get back to teaching and learning. I do like that I like the part, we are fortunate that our public schools are unique places in this country, places where diverse staff members and students come together who have significantly different backgrounds, opinions, and beliefs. You know, you think about this day and age, and people pick their silos, and they all live in their silos. And I mean, most of my Facebook friends certainly are of a certain bent, but schools are one of the few places where staff and students come from all different backgrounds, and you throw them all together and you think that they should get along. And the miracle is that mostly they do. But boy, it was a tough week when not everyone was getting along. I don't know if you heard, like in Omaha, the kids did a walkout on the Pledge of Allegiance in protest of something, of the election results. And so it started with this letter from Steve Joel, which he said he'd never gotten as many responses from an email that he'd sent to staff as he got from this. Grateful, grateful staff that said thank you. And now we have other phases planned where we provided all our principals with a list of, okay, here are some ideas to handle kids who are really upset. Here are some ideas to help kids who are ELL kids who are afraid. We've had meetings with our bilingual liaisons to try and meet with families, to talk to families. It's a long, long process of telling our story again, and a complicated one. I find this really complicated, but so acutely important. So this has been interesting. I told you mostly about crises, so I wanted to just show a quick couple pictures because we tell the good stories too. We have so many good stories. Student vote, I love student vote. We have something called Bubba's Closet where we give free coats to any family that shows up. I took that picture just a couple days ago. I love that picture. Look at her looking at that coat. Those kids line up an hour before we open on a Saturday morning, on a cold Saturday morning, to get hundreds of families to get free coats. First day of school, last day of school. We, every year now, we hand our LPS Twitter account over to a kid, and we let the kid run the Twitter account for a day, and that's been really fun. We had a middle school kid do it last year, and it was hilarious. We have our own March Madness brackets, where we start with, I don't know how many, and we work our way down to the grand winner. We did favorite lunches, we've done favorite children's books, we've done favorite fictional editors, educators. We're looking for an idea. If anybody has an idea of what we can do, we're running out of ideas, but it's been a lot of fun. We've been experimenting. I'm sure a lot of you have been experimenting with Facebook Live this year, having a lot of fun with that. Twitter had something like that, Periscope. It never worked for us, but the Facebook Live is working really well for us. We've had a lot of fun. We started podcasts last year. One of my colleagues wanted to try it, and I said, I don't know. It's really popular. What do I know? And you know, who knew? Who knew? I mean, I'm sitting there behind my desk writing a letter that's going to every single family member about clowns. And I'm saying to myself, who thought I'd be writing about clowns? And yet, we have families calling us, parents calling us, saying they're scared to send their kids because there might be clowns. So I mean, it's just, I continue to be amazed at life. I just continue to be amazed at life. Anyway, I kept saying to myself I was going to change, I was doing sort of a tentative mission statement, but I haven't changed the mission statement because I really like that mission statement. Tell our stories again and again and again, and I'm just urging all of you to remember to tell your stories. They're quite special. And back up your computer. Thank you. Questions?
I have one.
You bet.
Snow days.
What would you like to know about snow days?
How much do you get back from people on whether you have a snow day or don't have a snow day, and how do you handle it?
I almost included snow days because snow days is in my category called no-win situations. There are many in education. I think my philosophy in snow days is you have to explain the best you can. And we didn't used to do that. We used to just call it and then we'd never do an explanation. And now when we call a snow day, we always have an explanation. The wind chill is going to be this, or ice is going to be this. But it is a no-win situation because once upon a time, we called quite a few snow days at 5 a.m. in the morning because at 5 a.m. you have a much better notion of whether it's really going to snow. But with all the working parents, it's really hard. We got so much pushback about when you call it at 5 a.m. And so there's this huge push. You need to call it at 8 or 9 the night before. And trust me, my children are older now, but I get the whole fact about daycare. But at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, you don't always know really. I mean, sometimes there's not a snowflake on the ground, and we all know those, and whether people love to, like, oh, we're going to have the worst snow day ever in the history of the universe, and then we don't even get any snow. So our philosophy is more and more call it early, even if you make a mistake, because I think we've decided occasionally we'll call it at 5, but you'll notice that's pretty rare anymore. We want to call it before the 10 o'clock news just because everybody wants to put that on the 10 o'clock news and a lot of people watch it. It's helped enormously to have the electronic system that goes to all staff and students, and now we put it out on social media, and so kids often know it before they even get the phone call. Steve Joel is a riot when it comes to snow days because he came in and everybody thought he was going to be the snow day, like he said, I'm never going to call a snow day, and he is a marshmallow when it comes to snow days. He falls apart. It's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then he's been such an open, transparent superintendent that kids write him, and he's got this great presentation of all the messages that kids have written him, like, oh my gosh, you got to call a snow day tomorrow, or my friends are going to get killed. They don't know how to drive, or if you really cared about us, you'd call a snow day. So part of it is he's so much fun that sort of lightens the mood. So my philosophy is call it as soon as you can. If you make a mistake, just admit it and explain why you're calling it as soon as you can, because you're trying to help your families who you understand more and more about daycare. I think we also have done more explanation about, I think that we also have to consider demographics. I mean, we actually have had messages from people saying, I don't know why you called a snow day. I can deliver my kids in front of the school in my minivan. Not realizing that there's lots of people whose kids walk to school no matter what. Not realizing that there are kids who don't have coats. Not realizing that we have ELL families that wear flip-flops because they don't really understand what cold means until they're out there and it's snowing. So I'm also we try and do a better job helping our community understand that the demographics are changing, and that is going to influence your decisions on whether or not you're going to call a snow day. So like everything else, I think you have to keep telling your story. But ultimately, it's a no-win. You're just never going to win.
I love to watch the Twitter feed.
Oh, the Twitter feed is hilarious. You should watch. It is hilarious. Kids are
pretty dramatic.
Very dramatic. Marcia. Ah, thank you.
Could you say something about that process that you're in?
I'd love to. when Steve Joel first came to Lincoln Public Schools, we didn't really have strategic goals, major strategic goals, and he put something together pretty quickly. We did a community-wide effort, and we ended up with 4 major strategic goals for Lincoln Public Schools, and a lot of people don't know them, but one of them is we'll increase the high school graduation rate. I think that's one that a lot of people know. There's one about creating, improving community engagement, all kinds of things. 6 or 7 years have passed since that happened, and the first thing you have to understand is we have a totally different school board since that happened. And so you have strategic goals that your school board hasn't actually signed off on. And it is also amazing how much changes in 6 to 7 years. I mean, you blink and there's social media, and you blink and you can do how many, we have a technology in our schools and kids are learning on Chromebooks. And so Steve and the board decided that it was time to refresh those goals. It's interesting because we brought in a consultant on how we're going to do it, how we were going to do it, and the consultant said, I've never seen a community do this much. So what we're doing is we're going out into the community and we're asking folks, tell us how you envision our schools. There's some interesting questions. If you could dream, what one thing would you do? What do you think high school graduates need to know? I'm not going to remember all the questions. There's a survey online that you can take, but we've been going out into the community. So first of all, we had 4 public forums, and I really didn't expect a lot of people, and we haven't had a lot of people, but we identified 25 major groups, and we've gone to them and done a presentation on strategic planning. And then every single one of our 60-some schools, the principal is doing a meeting with staff, strategic goal meeting with staff, with families, and with community. So I think if you look online, I think we've engaged like 15,000 people so far. I mean, the number is going up. So we've touched those. I think about 1,000 people have gotten online to take the survey. And in the grand scheme of things, that's a pretty darn good penetration. We are keeping going through December, and then our evaluation and assessment people will take, thank goodness for evaluation assessment people, will take all that information, try and put it into kind of groups, themes. They'll bring together another community group who will look at those major themes and slowly but surely narrow it down to some major strategic goals, new, refreshed strategic goals, and then that will go to the school board who will finally decide what those goals are. How did it feel?
You know, it was fun. I never had kids in the system. I have a couple family members who are teachers, but it was fun for me just to get to, well, of course, everyone knows how shy I am about sharing my opinion.
Oh, so shy.
But it was really fun, and I was in a small group with 2 people who were completely different than I am, and so that was really interesting to hear what other people's ideas were. I mean, one of the questions is, with available resources, if you could do one thing to improve the schools, what would it be?
It's my favorite question.
Another one is, if resources were no object, what would you do? And that one was really fun. And then there were a couple other ones. Really, it's only 4 questions.
Yep.
So if you don't have an opportunity to go to one of these meetings, like go online.
www.lps.org, and it's right, Voices for the Future, and it's very visible on the front of our website. Go there, and it doesn't take long to do. I've been fascinated. I mean, I went to the presentation they did for LIBA, the Lincoln Independent Business Association. That was really interesting. And then you hear, the Rotary group, and then you hear the PTO group. It's really quite, because they're significantly different. That's why I'm glad I'm not evaluation and assessment. I have to go through all of these. But I remember the last time, it was quite fascinating how they very naturally fell into some main themes, which is, in my mind, kind of surprising, but perhaps not. But I'm very proud of our school district for tackling something that is taking it's taken a lot of my time and a lot of everybody's time. School board members, I don't even want to know how many hours they're putting into this, because there's school board members at every single. Was there a school board member at your meeting?
There was, and the 2 facilitators were teachers.
Yep.
One was a 2nd grade teacher and one was a middle school teacher.
Yep.
And that was fun too.
Almost all the facilitators are teachers, and that's very purposeful. So I love it. I think it'll be fun to see how different or how alike those goals look. One of the complaints about we will increase the high school graduation rate was that was so keyed to high school, and you really needed to look at a goal that started at preschool. And I'm going to be curious because I'm a real proponent of early childhood, and I know that lots of groups have been naming that. So I think that's on the top of a lot of people's minds too. So